Welcome to Swing State, our weekly look at what's going on in the world of politics and how it all affects you. I'm your host, Fox 8 senior political reporter Bob Buckley, and tonight we're talking to the Republican nominee for the North Carolina's 6th District in Congress, Addison McDowell. Welcome, Addison. And you know, I have to call you the nominee because technically that's what it is, although you don't face a Democrat in November.
Sure.
I guess theoretically something could happen to not make you the congressman, but...
Well, if that happens, I've done something terribly wrong, and so I don't plan on doing that.
And if that happens, it would be quite the political story. So we're going to talk a lot about assuming you're going to be in Congress starting January, which is when it'll happen. So you've got some lead time, which helps. How did you win this? Because you probably had less name recognition than at least 4 of your candidates.
Sure.
How did you break through that?
Yeah, so I mean, the very first thing that we did was strategize about how do we win, and then from that point on, everything that we did went through the lens, how do we win? And so every decision we made was very strategic, very tactical, and we just worked as hard as we possibly could. I came into the race, very little name ID, very little money compared to my opponents because they had a 2-month head start on me.
Right.
And so we were at a disadvantage from the very beginning, but I think the best thing we had was a message. And a story, and we told that story.
We're going to get into that in a minute. I want to get a couple of things you just mentioned. You said we, so we is who?
Sure, my wife and I.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you had a political team that helped you develop those.
Sure.
That strategy. When you said, what do we need to do to win, and you developed the plan, what was it that you needed to do to win?
So, when we looked at it, our biggest problem was we have no runway. This was a sprint, very fast, and so you don't have a lot of time for multiple messages. And so our plan the entire time was to peak on Election Day. We didn't want to peak in the middle of February. We wanted to peak on Super Tuesday. And so, our plan was get right over that edge on Tuesday.
And I noticed you pushed a lot about another thing we're going to get into later, which is your endorsement by former President Trump. One of your opponents felt very confident going into the primary because their research showed them that more people thought he was the endorsee of President Trump. And of course, you pushed the idea that it wasn't late on. I mean, that was a key element in this?
Absolutely. I mean, we had no time and about a third of the money to get the message out there. And so, we had to be strategic. Everywhere we went, we made sure that we maximized our time so that we could get that message out because it was important. But, we were truthful about that the whole time. And so that's what we did.
Let's get into some of the specifics of this. The biggest thing you ran on was your family story, particularly with your brother Luke. So it was kind of the impetus for the whole campaign. You can take your time to tell this story as much as you want because we have a lot of time in this program, one of the beauties of it. What is that story? How did it compel you into running for Congress?
Yeah, so, we lost my little brother, Luke, to fentanyl poisoning in 2016. And he was 20 years old. He was my best friend, and we, grew up as brothers will. We fought all the time, but we had a good time, and we had a great relationship with each other. And as that news broke to me, I was with now Senator Ted Budd, and we were at an event in Greensboro, and we got the call and went home. And so then the next few days,
who called you? Someone in your family?
My older brother. Older brother called me, and he never calls me. And so I picked it up, and he told me very bluntly, this happened. You need to come home. And so it was important to us to be there for my mom and dad.
This happened to my father, where his brother was abruptly killed when he and his wife and son were all hit by a train in a car. But my dad also died so young. I never got to talk to him about how does that affect someone.
Sure.
For you, describe what goes through your mind and just. I imagine it's a visceral, full body response when you hear those words. Luke is dead.
I mean, my legs went numb. I mean, I just felt like I was going to fall. Senator Budd, he walked outside to kind of embrace me, and he just wrapped his arms around me, and I just kind of fell into him because it was so unexpected that it really puts your body into shock. And so, I mean, it's devastating news, but as you go forward, it's like that you are going forward in life without an arm or something that you always notice isn't there. And that it comes about in more ways on Christmas or his birthday. This year we had, obviously this year was unique for his birthday, which is February the 7th. We had an event that day that we had to put a lot of work into, and so I got to go and spend some time where he's cremated and he was laid to rest. And so I spent about an hour with him, and it's the reason we did this was to make a difference on that issue. And so that was about the halfway point of the campaign. We needed the energy boost. Went in there and spent some time with him and came out and finished the job.
And so people are going to ask this question, so I have to ask it too. Fentanyl usually doesn't end up in cornflakes or something. What was Luke's situation that it was able to get into something he was dealing with?
We don't know. Really? We've the police, they told us some things, but they were really kind of, they didn't tell us a lot.
And hard to verify.
Sure. And so when his friends that were around, when we asked them, they didn't want to say much.
All right. We're going to get into some other issues later, but this idea that this story drove you to run, and you talk often about border security. What does that look like specifically? I mean, are we talking about building a wall? Are we talking about more agents? Are we talking about military? What does border security look like to you?
Well, I mean, I think it's all of the above, and it's whatever it takes. But right now, what we know is that the big issue that almost every voter we talked to brought up was that. And we have to do something about it, and that's exactly what we're going to do when we get to Washington.
People are, of course, going to paint that as anti-immigrant. So I'm assuming you're going to tell me you're not, but...
Sure. Well, I mean, of course. I mean, our country is built on that.
Right.
So
how do we balance the two?
Well, I mean, I think you look at every government agency, and they have some problems. You got bureaucrats that just sit in office forever and they can't get anything done, and I think that's probably the case in those agencies as well. But I think one of the things we hear from a lot of farmers in our district is that they need workers, and if that's how they want to get workers, great. But I think right now the key is secure the border.
Right, because a lot of these farm workers,
sure,
they want to come work and go home too. That just has to be fixed. All right, we can get into more of that in just a second. Because there are some of those issues, though, that you're warned not to talk about with your family over Thanksgiving, but we dive into all of those here, controversial or not, here on Swing State. Next, we'll talk about abortion rights and support for Ukraine and Israel. Stay with us. Welcome back to Swing State. I'm Bob Buckley, along with Republican Addison McDowell, the nominee for North Carolina's new 6th district. It's one I think you live in, right?
Yes, sir.
Because it includes much or all of Davidson County.
All of it, yes, sir.
All of Davidson County. And you're from the Lexington area, north of Lexington.
Yes, sir.
North Davidson High School. Abortion has been a contentious issue for more than 50 years, of course, in this country. You are pro-life,
yes,
correct? President Trump has come out with several positions on this, but seems to have settled in on supporting an abortion ban around 15 or 16 weeks. We have to say, though, this has not necessarily been a winning issue for your party. Gallup polling on bans at 18 weeks, 56 against, 41 for. And Gallup also polled on should abortion be banned once a heartbeat is detected. Still, 58 said no, 58%, 38% said yes. And even when you can even if you can detect a genetic disorder within the fetus, the baby, 57% still say it shouldn't be banned, 38% say it should. How do you navigate that? Are you willing to compromise and say, well, I'll accept at least some, but not all?
Well, Bob, I'm pro-life, and I think my experience with my children has been that they were precious babies from the very moment that they were made. They were a gift from God. And that is something that I'm unwavering on. But to be honest with you, I think that this issue is not one that we heard much about from the voters, much at all. But they need to know that I'm pro-life, and I think that all life is precious, and we're going to do everything we can to save life.
There is a push among some in the Republican Party to have a complete ban. If that comes up, that's something you would support?
Well, I'm pro-life, and I can't speak to legislation that may or may not happen, but I'm pro-life, and that's how I'm going to vote.
Okay, because it's a challenge, particularly with the the demographic that's left the Republican Party and headed to the Democratic Party, higher educated suburban women. The abortion or not. But if you notice too, if you look at polling too, I think the one from Pew brings up how the numbers flip, and there's a lot of support for some abortion rights in the first trimester, and it flips to very little support in the last trimester. Maybe that's someplace that a compromise can be worked out if you want to do that. Let's talk about Ukraine and Israel in particular. We are, $30 trillion, $32 trillion in debt, and yet we send billions of dollars to Ukraine. Do we continue to do that in your view? And I know you're not in Congress yet, and they're catching up to do, but I hope you've thought about these things.
Sure, and the answer is no, at least not right now. We have way too many problems here at home, and so we should not be giving another penny to the Ukraine when we can't account for where it's going. And we have no exit strategy with that. We have no plan of where is this money going and to what end. And so we don't want forever wars anymore. And so we think about, the border is wide open. We have problems here. The number one cause of death from people 18 to 45 is fentanyl poisoning. And that is an issue. And so we have to secure the border. But we have problems at home, and we can't lose sight of that.
Well, what about Israel then? At least, whether it's weapons or not,
Sure.
do you support allowing Israel to what they would call finishing the job here
Sure.
by destroying Hamas?
I mean, they're our number one ally. We have to have their back, and so absolutely.
But inevitably in a war, and this is a war in Gaza, Israel, lots of civilians tend to die in wars, more than particular here because Hamas uses, and they're open about it. Hamas will say, if their leaders say publicly, yes, we use our people as shields because everyone needs to be a martyr, is their theory. It gets ugly.
Sure. Absolutely.
I mean, is there anything we need to say or think about that in those type of situations?
I think all life is precious,
Yeah.
like I said, but I think we also need to have our allies back. And if Israel believes that that's the way to go, then we need to support them.
There's also, your wife is a therapist, right?
Yes, sir.
So mental health is on your issue. That is a huge issue, it seems, in this country and unaddressed.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on what the nation needs to do, what you might support in Congress?
Well, I think I'm very lucky, as a future member of Congress, that I have a therapist at home that I can kind of bounce things off of and who will keep me grounded. But what I've seen with her is the wait lists at her practices are incredible. I'm talking they fill up in 3 days for a 40-hour work week, and a lot of these programs that license clinicians in that area, the programs at the universities are not full. And so we need to figure out something to get more people there. But it's an issue that is unaddressed, and it's something that everybody deals with.
One of the reasons is that a couple of Supreme Court cases made it much more difficult to involuntarily commit someone for treatment. And both of those court cases came about time, a beginning of recession, so a lot of states and communities just wrote that off their budget list. Well, we can get rid of this one. We've lost 95% of our mental health beds in this country since the late 50s. Would you support perhaps changing the law to make it easier to force someone into treatment?
So I think North Carolina, the state legislature, is a beautiful example of this, how they have taken mental health seriously. And they have, their Senator Jim Bergen is the first example that comes to mind. He is a workhorse on this issue. He may be the hardest working man in the state, but it's something he takes seriously. He has people call him at 11 a.m., 11 p.m. We need help. And so that's what our state legislature is dealing with. And so I think that they have got it figured out, and we need to follow their lead. You
have worked in insurance, and I want to get a little more of that in our next segment, but what is insurance's role here? Because insurance companies traditionally don't jump at chances to spend more money.
Sure.
But you know the industry somewhat. Is part of the answer in the insurance industry?
I think the answer is we need to be able to provide people the care that they need. and if that's being creative with things like telehealth, or loosening up the licensing requirements on which the states that my wife could practice in. Maybe that's something we do, but I think that it boils down to giving people the care that they need and making it accessible.
What about the idea of the state saying to insurance companies through some type of law, you've got to open up your purse to this type of coverage?
Sure. Well, I don't think the government should be involved like that with a private company.
Okay. But there may be more you think that insurance industry can do.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you may know, by the way, that tonight's guest, as we mentioned earlier, got former President Trump's endorsement in his congressional race. We'll see how that came about next. Welcome back to Swing State. We're talking with Addison McDowell, the Republican nominee for North Carolina's 6th District congressional seat. And people probably heard you got President Trump's endorsement, former President Trump. And a lot of people said, how the heck did that happen?
Sure.
Because as we mentioned, you were not the well-known one. He had endorsed Christian Castelli in this race 2 years ago. How did this happen? I mean, you don't just call up and walk in.
Sure. That's actually what we did.
Really?
Yeah. So I've been a friend of Donald Trump Jr.'s for some time. He's a hunting buddy of mine.
Really?
And Don Jr. and I, we never talked politics at hunting camp. We talked about our families and the hunting trip we were on. We never talked politics. Well, we go on an annual trip every year, and this year people had been asking me to consider this. And when he asked me, I said, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I'd love to meet with your father. And we set that up, went down there and pitched President Trump, and he liked what we had to say.
How long a meeting is this?
So I kind of anticipated multiple scenarios, but I landed on, you probably get 5 minutes with him.
Yeah.
Well, it was an hour and 15 minutes.
Wow.
I'm still tired from that meeting. No, but it was great, and he wanted to know about me and our story, and I told it to him, and why I was going to be a fighter for his agenda and have his back, and he was happy with what he heard.
Okay, and you have to ask for the sale, as they say.
Sure.
So you said, can I have your endorsement?
Yes, sir.
And he said right away,
he said, let's start drafting the statement right now.
Okay. I think we might have broken a little news here tonight. I didn't know that Don Jr. actually was the one who asked you to run?
He was one of them. I mean, there were a bunch of people. He was about the last one before I made the final decision, but my wife was the one who had to say yes.
I get that. So, it's definitely a family thing. Like they say, the most unappreciated people in the Navy are Navy wives,
Sure.
like my mother-in-law is. So the wives are essential in this. All right, so my guess is many of these people wouldn't have asked you to run or consider running if you hadn't had some experience in the thing with Congressman Richard Hudson, who is running for re-election and is up in most of the polls I've seen, and with then Congressman, now Senator Ted Budd. What did you do for them? What was your work with them?
So with Congressman Hudson, it was campaign related work. So we went and knocked doors. Was primarily what we did. And then I spent about a year in his official office there in Concord doing, I was just an intern for him. And so, I got to see the way that a congressional office works, and I got to see a member of Congress that really cares about his constituency and how best to serve them. And so then with Senator Budd, then at the time it was just Ted Budd.
Right.
He hadn't been elected to anything.
Okay.
And so we were there right after he got through his 250 person primary, the 17 or 16 person primary. We came on board right after that and worked for him for about 3 years. And so spent a lot of time with him on the
Doing
ground.
what with him?
Yeah, so we would travel with him. When I would go with him to the airport, I'd pick him up from his house at sometimes 2, 3 a.m. to take him to these red-eye flights to D.C. And so, got to spend a lot of time with him. I got to spend a lot of time with him as the congressman of an area that's very similar to this district.
Yeah.
But we worked in the office doing casework, constituent services, going to events on his behalf when he had to be there for votes. And so we got to do a lot with the people of this district.
So you have some idea how all this works, but I don't know that anyone expects you to be an expert right now before you get in there. So what are you doing to get ready?
Sure. So, the big thing that I've thought through is I don't want to make mistakes because I have a very lucky scenario where I don't have a general election, and I'm one of maybe.
Well, if there is one,
sure,
you're not likely to lose it.
Yeah. So, we've got that gap of time, and so I can learn as much as I can, and I don't have the unknown of kind of what's going to happen.
Right.
And so we can get in and learn, but I want to ask members, what are the mistakes you made so that I don't make them? And so, we're focused. We're trying to learn up on as much as we can, but I really want to know what people that have done it before have to say.
Well, I would assume you're going to talk to Richard Hudson and Ted Budd and perhaps Virginia Fox, who represents part of this area too. What about the person who holds the seat, although it's a slightly different district? The person in the seat right now, Kathy Manning, is a Democrat.
Sure.
Have you talked to her?
No, she's not. I don't have her number. She's not reached out to me, but I'll have a conversation.
I can get you her
with
number if you want to talk.
I'll have a conversation with anybody.
Right.
So if she wants to talk, absolutely. But I don't have a relationship with her pre-existing, so I would need to talk to folks that I know and trust.
Because I think that is something a lot of people do worry about, is seeing people go to Congress, although holding to their principles, looking for ways to get stuff done. Perfect example that they find, a lot of people have told me they find distasteful, is Kevin McCarthy essentially does his job by getting a budget passed, but he had to work with some Democrats to do it, and essentially loses his job over it. And a lot of traditional voters who, politics isn't their life, they're just trying to live they think this is insanity. I mean, what do you think of the way Kevin McCarthy lost his job, and how do we prevent this idea that the two sides can't work with each other?
Sure. Well, I think it starts with having conversations, and that's what we're going to do. But I think that the founders created our country, and they wanted the House to be the wild, wild west. They didn't want it to be easy to get things done, so you've got to fight. We need to elect fighters, and that's exactly what I am.
Well, fight, and they hear that word, but does that preclude then being able to work with someone?
No.
And now that includes not just common ground is not that common.
Sure.
So what that means is you have to compromise sometimes.
Sure.
All right, I'll give you this that you want, even though I don't like it, if you'll give me that.
Sure.
You're open to those type of things?
On 90% of the issues, they're going to be bipartisan. But on the ones that are not, I am unashamed, and I'm principled, and I'm going to stand up for what I believe in. And so, if it comes to those kinds of issues, I'm going to be, pretty cut and dry on where I'm going to be.
It's quite a journey, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
All right, Addison, thank you. That is our show for tonight. Please join us each week at this time as we talk to elected officials and opinion leaders on the latest news that is affecting you.